Hi, and welcome to MindShifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce. I'm your co-host, Jeanie Ryce, and we welcome you to the show. Today is Monday, July the 14th, 2014. It's Parent-Teacher Talk Day. Our call-in number is 646-200-4169. Press 1, and that puts you in queue to talk to us. And we would love to hear your comments and your questions, because then that makes this your show. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart. I'm here. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. Delight to be here. Delight to have this opportunity once again to share the ancient Aramaic principles of forgiveness. And today especially being Parent-Teacher Talk Day, the principles as they apply to our relationship with children and as both teachers and parents. So we're honored and delighted. I'm not sure who's with us on the show today. I've been kind of hectic with everything that's going on at Heartland, and so haven't really been doing details in that regard. But who do we have with us this morning, Jeanie?
I was just switching over to look up a phone number because I don't have the phone numbers all memorized, but I don't believe that Dr. Tim or Suzanne are either one with us.
Okay. Do we have an 816 number on with us?
No.
No? Okay.
Nope.
And is Julie with us?
Julie is with us.
Oh, good. Well, let's say hello to Julie and see how she is today.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Jeanie. I am doing well. It's a warm day in the Ozarks.
It is a warm day in the Ozarks. Definitely the temperature's up. Someone said last night it's supposed to be down into the 40s, but I don't know where they got that piece of information, but we certainly haven't seen the 40s for a little while.
This is true. But I also heard that we're supposed to get a little rain, and the temperature is supposed to drop. So that's good with me if it happens.
Yes, I would go with that. That would work. Although it's been fortunately a very mild summer so far, cool, relatively cool compared to what it often is. So we're blessed. And do you have anything on your mind today for talking about parenting and teaching children? Of course, we're teaching ourselves in that process too, aren't we?
This is true. I was thinking about Sunday. It's not Sunday. It's Sunny's comment about that we're not really talking about teenagers, and I actually think, we're all one, and everything that we talk about is about us. And so it's not like anything specific, just geared to this totally young child, what we're talking about. When we were talking about modeling, we model for each other. We model for our children, no matter what their age is. Modeling speaks louder than words all the time. And so, I kind of just didn't really disagree. I kind of disagreed with her because I felt like everything Suzanne has shared and Dr. Tim and you and even myself was geared to just everybody. We're doing our process. I wish I could think that I have the answer for somebody else's child or their life, but I don't. I'm doing my own process, and as I do my own process, I might get insight to help myself and or others. So it's kind of a process we're doing.
For sure. And it applies at every age. I mean, you can take every principle we've talked about on Parent-Teacher Talk Mondays and apply it to the 90-year-old mind as easily as the 50, as easily as the teen, as easily as the small child. And one of the challenges that happens that I've found, and I'm talking about raising my own children and then watching other people raise their children, is that the words they hear early in their lives become the speech in their future lives. And so the child at whatever age, and increasingly as they move into the teen years, will reflect back to the parent exactly what the parent's been doing and saying. Their speech is going to be the speech that they heard. And, as you know, in Laws of Living, we talk about a thing called regulatory speech. And it's the speech that, one, regulates our physiology, two, regulates what we call our cellular chemistry, regulates our hormones, regulates our feelings, regulates our thoughts, regulates our creative process, and that's the speech that we hear early in life that we then start to repeat to ourselves. It starts on the outside. What the child hears, the child will tend to repeat. And when the child repeats it, if the child comes to the point where they experience the results of that speech, reducing their stress, then it will tend to proceed from conscious external speech to silent speech inside the child's head to unconscious speech within the child. And then it will regulate everything the child does. Once they get past the age of 13, unless one chooses to go in and start to chip away at and change their internal dynamics, it will tend to regulate everything they do all their lives. And so one of the challenges is that the teenager reflects back to the parent what the parent has unconsciously done and hasn't dealt with. What the parent has been sowing, the child will tend to bring back a crop made of that. And that challenges the parent, which to me is the reason why the parent needs to be putting the pen to the paper. Unfortunately, what most adults do is they see the problems they had reflected in their child, and they say, that child has a problem. I've shared on the show before a gentleman that I worked with who shared with me when he woke up an experience that had happened to him several years before. And he had moved from one geographical area of the country to another. He had left behind a business and left behind bills, and he sat with a person that he was hoping to go to work for, and they spoke about someone who came from that geographical area, and they had checked that person out, and that person had left the business and left bills, and, told this whole story, which was exactly his story, and he didn't recognize that it was about him. The person who he was expecting or hoping to work for was telling him what they knew about him that he hadn't shared. And it took him years to look back and go, oh, my God, that guy was talking about me. That's how deep the blockage of truth can go. And so when the child reflects back to the parent, if the parent isn't doing their work, they'll think the child has a problem. And the child is simply a symptom. It's just like, we have a whole system. In this case, a person has what we call a body, which is a whole system of cells. And if there's something that isn't dealt with, that's put into the structure, then creates symptoms within the so-called physical structure within the so-called body. And the person who doesn't deal with that has a family system. And if they stay in denial and dissociation, then it will tend to express symptomatically through some other part of the family system. And unfortunately, oftentimes a particular child becomes the scapegoat for the parent's issues because the child doesn't have the same denial and dissociation the parent has, but they have the same content. So one of my favorite comments about children is that having children is like having your unconscious mind hanging out in true living color and Dolby sound. And when you first see it, you won't believe it's about you. Have you seen any of that in the work you've done? I know you were in the inner city schools and worked with a lot of parents and a lot of children. Have you seen any of that kind of thing unfold in the work you've done there?
In the work that I was doing in my classroom, I certainly saw myself out there in Dolby sound. I mean, I was like, I remember, really venturing forth, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was doing it in a conscious, semi-conscious way. And as I, kept increasing the energy in my classroom to make it a spiritual healing environment as well as an academic environment, I noticed I was being triggered more and more. And so I had to take time out to actually do my worksheets. I can remember staying up until 1 o'clock in the morning doing my worksheets so that the next day I could be refreshed and also be able to, you know, keep love conscious and stay conscious and create the environment that I wanted to create for the children as well as myself. I knew that what I sowed I would reap, and so I wanted to sow something different and experience something totally different. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if somebody would have told me ahead of time what I was going to experience, I don't even know if I would have ventured forth, you know. But, you know, I did venture forth, and I think that's just the way life works. When you are willing to heal, you know, then life shows up, and wherever your interaction is with whomever, you're going to be resonated into conscious awareness of your issues. And I think that was exactly what happened in the classroom, and I think that's exactly what the children were doing for the parents. I kind of heard a funny sound. I'm not sure. Okay.
We lost that last.
Okay. Yeah, because my phone sounded like it turned off. So I said I noticed that the same thing was happening for the parents. The law of resonance was playing out for them too. The children in my class were resonating their parents, and the children in the class were resonating each other. So you can really see the law of resonance in action when you got conscious about it. So, you know, as I got conscious about it, then I could, you know, I could handle it better. But I must say that once you commit to that, you know, it is pretty constant until you can create, you know, I don't know, a degree of peacefulness within yourself. It's always about me, you know, it's always about, you know, my interaction with others and what am I feeling. And if I'm feeling it, it's mine. And that's been very helpful, you know, where you had on the original worksheet, if I'm in pain, I'm in error. And when I would say that I'm the one that's in pain right now, so it's got to be mine.
For sure, for sure. Did your phone cut out again, Julie?
I don't think so. Can you hear me
okay.
right?
Yep, you're loud and clear. And I know Jeanie has done a lot of work with kids. And so, Jeanie, do you have any thoughts in this regard or any input for parents or teachers who are raising children and dealing with their own issues at the same time?
Well, I actually have a private session with someone as soon as the radio show is over, and their child is an adult child, but they are supposed to be present because their issue is between them, and, of course, it's the power person dynamics and everything, so I can answer that better after 2 o'clock.
Well, I'm thinking back to the years where you did a lot of work with small children, and you know, just wondering if you have any input in regard to this conversation with all of those kids, and of course the parents you interacted with at the same time.
No, not right off.
Okay, cool.
There is something that I'd like.
Go for it.
Something I'd like to. Okay. So, you know, one of the things that I did work with my children in the classroom was, you know, their speech and how they talked to one another and how they listened. And so I had the commitment on the board with the, you know, the I promise. And so that helped a lot with the regulatory speech. And once you begin to work with that with the children as well as work with that yourself, you know, the whole energy seems to soften within the classroom. So I think that, you know, you were introducing the regulatory speech and the importance of, you know, that you said often, life and death are in our words. And so if we can begin to look behind our regulatory speech and see what else is stored there, you know, again, Einstein, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. If we would just look at that, what are our thoughts, and be willing to heal that and change those goals and change that energy, you know, the whole speech begins to shift. Without a conscious change, it just seems to soften naturally.
For sure. Well, our call-in number is 646-200-4169. And if you're a parent or a teacher, we'd love to hear from you and have your input. If you have a question for us, we would love to hear it. And if you're in the phone queue and you push 1, that will put your hand up in the control panel, and Jeanie will know you have a question. And that way we'll
And Dr. Tim's with us now.
Well, let's say hello to Dr. Tim and see how the young man is.
I'm doing quite well, thank you. Hi, Julie.
Awesome.
Hi, Jeanie. I'm just sitting here listening to the Parent-Teacher Talk Monday and reflecting on a session I just had with a 69-year-old. And she's recently begun to understand that all of the things she's done all of her life to try and figure it out has led to more of the same. And so I was going through the goal canceling process and introducing the concept of giving up the need to be right, and she immediately went back to, well, I won't be able to resolve any of this because this goes back to, it begins in my first week of life. And she has all these traumas mapped out that she's been dealing with other therapists for decades, and she's certain that it all began in her first week of life, and then again when she was 2 years old, and then again when she was 5, etc. And I was thinking about the relevance of Julie's last statement, where as we begin to train this person who is 69 years old to realize that if she's in pain, she's in error, it's giving her a level of freedom she's never experienced in her life in the past 69 years. And so that's what we were doing, and it ran a little bit late because she was late getting to the session, but we were just introducing her to the entire process of forgiveness and canceling what doesn't belong and asking for a source outside of her logical mind to give her some answers.
Right. Well, we had someone at the that was here at the Food Fund Forgiveness last night had a major breakthrough. She's been doing the work for some time, and she had a major opening last night. And after seeing that, it's like, well, Michael, I did your workshops 2 years ago when you were in my city. Why didn't you open this space then? Why couldn't you have figured out how to tell me about that 2 years ago? Can't we just make this simpler? And there's in the ancient teachings where they understood that if the base that we were coming from in our minds was hostility and fear, and the way to tell that is when the stress is up and the chips are down, do you do hostility or fear? If so, then the base you're coming from is that, then that mind has no brain cells to understand the active presence of love and the conversation that comes from that. I use an example, in one of the workshops where I talk about, we've got a man from the jungles of South America, lives at the equator, and we want you to tell him so that he can experience exactly the way you do a two-door igloo. So we've got somebody who's never experienced a temperature below 85 degrees. We've got somebody who's never seen anything more complex than a dugout canoe. Somebody cut a tree down, hauled it up, put it in the water, they had a canoe. And so we want that person to understand, and thinking about how are we going to get this person to recognize that there's a place on the planet, temperature goes to 50, 70, 80, 100 below zero for months at a time. This person's never experienced anything less than 85 degrees. Let's see somebody explain that to them. And then let's explain to him how when it goes to 100 below zero, the river that he swam and fished in and navigated to the neighbors' huts and all of that, that river turns to a solid like stone. And somebody has a machine with which to cut the stone, the river, the frozen water, the ice, and build the building out of it. What are we going to have, in order to have a conversation about Eskimos living in an igloo up near the equator, near the North Pole? How are we going to explain this? What are we going to have to do to help this person build the brain cells to recognize what we're talking about? And for someone who's lived out of a fear-based and hostility-based mind, and again, the way you can tell if that's where you've lived is when the stress is up and the chips are down, is that what you turn to, fear and hostility? If it is, then you know that the root of the output of your mind generally, even when you're speaking nice words of love about somebody, that the root of the output of your mind is still your hostility and fear-based mind. And to get somebody to hear the conversation that's actually coming from human life, and human life we describe as holding a newborn child, to recognize the conversation coming from there, foreign a concept as, you know, a two-door igloo is to somebody living at the equator. And it just takes time. Somebody has to dedicate the time, the intelligence, the money, and the energy to building the brain cells to recognize what the conversation is even about. And each time we recognize what the conversation is about, there's another opening, there's another opening, another opening. And then the next time we hear the same conversation, there'll be another opening and another one. And it's always quite amazing, but it is definitely a challenge to move somebody from hostility and fear-based perception to love-based perception. And that's the real conversion that needs to take place on our planet with those who are functioning out of that hostility and fear-based mind. And of course, the parent will tend to use words based in the mindset of the parent. The child will tend to use words based in the mindset of the parent, because that's the major influence. That's the source of the genes in the child, which is thought, feelings, physiology, and that's the environment the child lives in. And that environment, as you were pointing out last week, and is pointed out by Bruce Lipton, is the environment stimulates content. Content produces perception. Perception is based in not what's happening in the world, but rather based in what's stimulated by the environment in terms of content. So the person who has rage-based content sees a certain event happen. The person who has love-based content, they're going to have totally and completely different realities in precisely the same circumstance. And so building the brain cells becomes a key concept in the whole process in order to make that shift. And we can't function out of brain cells we don't have. So that's a big challenge.
Michael, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. When you were talking in the very beginning, we were talking about regulatory speech, and in our school district, we had some low-income housing, and we definitely had some serious problems going on with that low-income housing, shootings and things like that. So the speech could be pretty rough in that particular area, and some of my children, obviously their parents lived there or their mother lived there, and they would come from that environment. And so their speech was harsh at times, and a lot of, they could easily curse at 5 years old. So I never heard those words until I was like in 7th or 8th grade, but, they were using those words at 5 years old. But that speech, you said, if speech reduces their stress, they will choose that speech over time. That will become part of their regulatory speech. So if they hear a certain speech from their parents, and of course their parents are their models, and they notice that that speech, seems to be powerful, then as the child begins to use the speech and feels a reduction of stress, are you saying that that speech then will become first conscious speech, then unconscious speech, and then regulatory speech?
Yes, precisely. And that's why, the old saying is the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I know that when we go into prisons, when I ask the question, how many are observing your children going down the same path as you've gone down? Virtually all of them do, and many of them have already given up. Well, my son, my daughter's going to end up in prison just like I am. That's just the road they're going, and they don't have much choice. And when we take, especially with what has just the just completed the laws of living in the prison in Ionia, super security prison there. The speech patterns, the internal process that happens totally shift when we start to undo the regulatory speech based in hostility or fear and begin to plant regulatory speech based in love and forgiveness. So it becomes a whole different process. And when that speech is experienced to reduce stress, then, you know, the kid who is nervous and afraid and high stress and watches parents, for instance, use that example of curse, and, you know, people make way for the cursing father, you know, mom steps aside, the kids get out of the way, so child watches and goes, oh, well, that's the way you control people when you're scared and nervous. So the child who's scared and nervous starts emulating dad and cursing and swearing, and, gee, people move out of their way. And now the reason for their nervousness is, you know, the trigger for their nervousness is gone. So you go, well, that's good. That's the way to do life. Simply because in that circumstance there was experienced a reduction of stress. Now, it might, in the long haul, and usually does, create a whole other level of stress, you know, when the person who's cursed out comes back with a gun, as you say, and shoots. But that's not hooked up to the original event. And so what happens is, the way speech develops is, it tends to be experienced externally in the environment, then the child tends to say it. You know, little Johnny at 3 wonders how mom caught him with his hand in the cookie jar. He didn't realize that he was speaking out loud when he walked past mom, saying to himself, I'm going to go sneak a cookie. So there's external speech, and that's the next step to moving into the unconscious process. Then that external speech becomes silent speech. Johnny learns you don't say out loud, I'm going to go steal a cookie, but in your head you're going, I'm heading for the cookie jar. You don't say anything. And then when that is experienced to reduce stress, for instance, Johnny's in pain and turmoil, and he knows if he can just get to the cookie jar, he'll have a hit of sugar, and that sugar, which acts very much like cocaine, will anesthetize him and reduce his stress. And so stealing from the cookie jar becomes, that's the speech. That's what directs behavior. And that moves progressively from conscious to silent to unconscious. And what's experienced to reduce stress moves into the unconscious. Then it becomes automatic behavior. It's behavior that's beyond our reach and control until we've got the tools with which to undo and change that behavior. It happens automatically. It is totally and completely out of awareness, but it runs the system, runs the structure. Does that get to your question?
Yes. Thank you very much. I was thinking about, you know, when you talked about when a child gets to the age of 13 and, you know, a parent should be coaching their child versus in a different capacity before the age of 13. Maybe you could elaborate on that, because I remember even working with your children and, you know, my phone did that again. I remember working with your children and before the age of 13, and then after the age of 13, you began to coach them and do a few different behaviors with them versus what you did prior to 13.
Right. So the idea there is that the speech system tends to solidify, and that's why virtually every culture has a rite of passage at the age of 13 from childhood into adulthood. And the regulatory speech system kind of solidifies at that point, and the child is no longer open to being, if nobody's noticed, to being directed by the parent, And that's where, if the parent understands, they can move from director. They can direct the young child's mind and behavior, but when the parent tries to direct the structure, the child, after the speech system is solidified, they're going to get a lot of blowback. And the blowback they're going to get is going to be exactly what they did to the child when the child was doing what they didn't like. So when the child did a behavior that the parent didn't like, that didn't meet the parent's goals, the behavior that the parent did became power person behavior if it wasn't based in love. And so once the child hits 14, speech system solidifies, and that parent's still trying to control and direct the way they did prior to the age of 13, then the behaviors that the parent did to the child will do back to the parent. The 14-year-old will do back to the parent. And if you move out of that space of trying to control and direct to the space of coaching and support, and you make that transition gently, it will tend to make room for a whole other relationship with the child. You won't go through those, the way that often happens with the terrible dudes also happens with the terrible teens, and it's a result of that particular dynamic. And Jeanie tells us that we've got a hand up, so let's check in with a caller.
Awesome. It's area code 630. You're on the air.
Well, hey, everybody. This is Mark out in Chicago.
Hey, sir, welcome.
Hey there. It's been a while, but I'm back and I'm tuning in to a couple of these shows, and I really like the conversation today. I appreciate everybody's input. It was really spectacular. And I had a couple things to share along the topic since I've got 5 children, ages 16, 14, 12, 8, and 4. So I've seen the spectrum, or I'm seeing the spectrum of working with different kids at different ages.
Right.
One of the things
how does that idea of director to coach fit in your experience as your kids have gone past that age of passage, that rite of passage of the age around 13?
Yeah, it resonates quite a bit. I believe that once they hit the age of 12, 13, that you really turn into, I've turned into a father figure who's able to tell more stories and parables and kind of get them to see the teaching for themselves instead of being directive in terms of teaching from an authoritative standpoint as being the traditional authority, but instead speaking from an authoritative standpoint through the stories, and then they kind of get their own learning from it.
Right. Yeah, that's a wise way to move, to make that shift, because the parent who tries to keep controlling the child the way they did when they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is going to have one heck of a time.
Well, and I have had, since I've changed so dramatically in the last few years via this work and other things that I've been doing, I have had my teenagers say, well, Dad, you said ... It might have been a way that I had a perspective at a certain time in my life. And I allowed myself to communicate that it's okay to change your mind. It's, you know what, I've learned some new things and I changed my mind, and that's okay. And so this is what I'm communicating now, and it's allowing them, I think, the freedom or the flexibility to realize that it's okay to let go of things that you might have held on to at one point in your life. You don't have to hang on to it forever and say, well, that was the golden rule and I have to stick by it, no matter what. Not referring to the golden rule of the Bible, just whatever the rule was. That rule needs to stay. No, it can change, and it can change as appropriate with the behaviors that are happening in the house and the dynamics that are occurring and what's necessary to really bring the family forward as a unit without leaving anybody too far in the dust. We want to bring everybody along together.
Good. Great thought. So any questions?
Let's see. Michael said something. Go ahead.
Michael said something.
Go ahead, Julie.
No, I didn't hear your question, though.
Well, what I was going to say is one of the things that I noticed in my classroom, that if I was more, what shall I say, humble or more, I guess the best way to describe this is that I used to think my parents were perfect, and I realized that later that they weren't perfect, and they were doing the best they could, but I didn't like the fact that they weren't perfect. And I always let the children know that I wasn't perfect, that I make mistakes too, and that I'm doing the best I can, so that they would be understanding if at the times that I was off target, they could see me in a more humbling way and also see me more realistic rather than me being away from them. I was more part of them. And I felt that that was actually really kept us more in a cohesive environment with, oh yeah, once in a while Mrs. Haversick makes a mistake too. They were accepting and respectful of that.
Yeah, they like to see that and that vulnerability, and I've shown a lot of that too, where they can see that, Dad made a mistake, Mom made a mistake, whatever it is, and we allow ourselves then to come and communicate about it and what the error was and how we can get back on track. But having them witness that process in a way that's in their language has been more aligned with our experience here at the house too. Like if I go into a worksheet process out loud, my oldest son rolls his eyes because when I first learned the worksheet process, I was so gung-ho, I wanted everyone to learn it with me. And as I became more of a master at it, I was able to change the language so that it met them where they were, instead of trying to bring them where I am, or I was at the moment. And that softened things too, where it's like I could show my vulnerability, show where the errors were, where I was off target, move back on target, and then communicate in their language. Whether they're 8 or 10 or 15, they can hear it how they need to hear it.
Right. Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and that reaching out is very sweet and genuine, and they will get it on an energetic level. Your behaviors, your actions will speak so much louder than any words you could have ever said. It's really right on.
That's exactly it. I love what you just said. The behaviors are what really demonstrate the work, and it's not the words that we're using to walk through necessarily a worksheet with a 5-year-old, and it's just not going to work, right? But it's really those behaviors. And so sometimes I'll sit with my 5-year-old, and I will actually be more inquisitive than teaching. I'll ask her questions, and she's teaching me. And the wisdom that comes from her mouth is just extraordinary, but it's the questions that open up and allow her to kind of bring that forth. And if I'm telling her what to do all the time, she's not going to be able to bring that into our experience, and she's going to be shutting down her faculties of her intuition and her wisdom. So it's really been extraordinary with her, and then I'm trying to move that into some of the older kids who didn't have quite as open an experience with me when they were younger.
Right on. Very good.
Yeah. I think that the point bears repeating that you made, Mark, of being able to show that it's okay to make a mistake, and it kind of ties in, Julie, with what you said. With well, I thought my parents were perfect, and of course, if I think my parents are perfect, then I approve of them, and if I take that on, then I think I have to be perfect to be approved of. And if I'm not perfect, which I haven't met anybody yet that is, if I'm not perfect, then I start pouring disapproval on myself, and it becomes crazy time. People, they don't need once their power person functions as the external critic, they don't need an external critic anymore. They've got one set right in their own minds, alive and well, the power person's voice continues within them. And I think as a parent to be able to model, yeah, I made a mistake, and here's what I'm going to do to correct it. The child goes, oh, my parents aren't perfect. Gee, maybe I don't have to be perfect either. Maybe I can make a mistake. And what I'll get is love and support and coaching for healing when I make a mistake, rather than I'm going to get beat up, disapproved of, told that I'm going to hell, told what's wrong with me, told how, a wrathful God's going to come get me, or, whatever threats parents use, and sometimes they're pretty bizarre, because that's the voice that stays inside the head of that child decades into their lives. So awesome, Mark. Anything else to share with us?
Let's see. One more thing. I just wanted to acknowledge you guys for doing what you're doing. As always, I appreciate it, and I've grown with it and matured with it. And I feel like I'm really stepping into kind of another layer of truth and belief in the work of how effective it is in my life. And so as I'm seeing it transform the family in a way that's really natural, it's really given me more hope that more families can do that. So I just offer that, and I'll continue to tune in and add some input where appropriate. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate your input. Thanks for your call. Okay, Jeanie, you've got a couple more callers. Let's go for it.
Yeah. The first one is 417-273. Who do we have?
Hello.
Well, that sounds like
Hi
Jim.
there.
Hey there, young man. For those who don't know Jim Farmer, this is Jim, who's here at Heartland and on the support team and assisting and putting things together. And welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to acknowledge Mark and express my envy because I wish I had known what he knows now when my kids were young. Just a tremendous blessing for you and your children, Mark. And I have a little anecdote that ties into what we're talking about. I'm the oldest of 7, and of course, as the kids turned 17, they got a car one way or the other. And my dad had this thing about he was incessantly checking to make sure there was enough oil in these cars. And, I mean, it was like obsessive. And to the point where my kid sisters was like, Dad, will you stop already? I'll check the oil. It's okay. And I didn't find out until I was probably 40 years old that the reason why he was so incessant about that was the very first car he owned, he ran the oil out of and blew the engine.
Right.
And so that, for me, is an example of where I'm going with this is that I wish I had shared more. He created that image of the perfect dad and my mom, the perfect mom. And that had an effect on us, as Michael, you've very clearly explained, had the effect on us of, going to that place of an internal critic when things did not line up with our expectations of the way we ought to be in life. And that carried on into my marriages, certainly, because I had an expectation that, marriage is perfect. People don't argue. They don't fight. No need for communication workshop because there are never any issues that come up between mom and dad, and that was the way it was. But as I think back on it, if rewind were an option in life, I would be more vulnerable with my children. And I think vulnerability is the key to intimacy. And I've learned that in recent years, but I really wished I had learned it back then. And I know that it's not too late. I know that I can be vulnerable with my children. They're adult children now. The youngest is 42. The oldest is 49. But I can do that, and will look to do that so that they see. I mean, I did a little bit of it, but not nearly enough. I mean, I did share with them some of my outcomes that were less than desirable, but had I been awake and aware back then, I would have shared them as outcomes and not failures, And I think that's really important, that our children don't feel like they failed at something. They just had a different outcome that did not match their intention or their goal. And that it's okay to sometimes not reach your goal. It's okay not to match your intention. And it's what you do with the next step and how you treat yourself that really determines our individual self-worth and so on. And that's pretty much all I have to say. And I can't thank you, Michael and Jeanie, enough for all that you guys have done. And I've been here at Heartland now for a month. Made a commitment to fly back in August and then drive back up and hang here until ... I really enjoy it here, and it's a great place. I'm 71 years old, and it's never too late to heal. And I've had some tremendous healing just in the month that I've been here. Anyway, I'm a little bit windy if you didn't notice, but anyway, I'll again thank you, and I will turn the phone over to somebody else.
Cool. Thank you, Jim. We're delighted you're here. Glad to have you on the team. One of the projects Jim's working on, and just to kind of put it out there in brain cells so that when things mature and we start putting it out, everybody will know that it's what it's about. But we are working toward creating Heartland South. We're in the Ozarks in southern Missouri, just getting ready actually to start our intensive season. We're doing our first workshop, which is Food, Fun, Forgiveness, and Work program, which is preparing the property for the intensive season. And then on the 18th, on Friday, we'll begin a 16-day codependence to interdependence communication practicum. And then we'll move from that into a 9-day Why Is This Happening to Me Again, a 9-day teacher training. The teacher training is designed for people who want to really deepen their experience with the forgiveness process and or want to teach. And then we'll do 16-day Laws of Living. So that's our intensive season at Heartland, and we anticipate that probably by this time next year, this will be Heartland North, and in Costa Rica, we'll have Heartland South. And so one of the things Jim has been diligently working on here is helping to put together all of the infrastructure and learn how to operate that infrastructure to create a crowdfunding project to help us to put together Heartland South. We're looking at a 56-acre piece of property that has 9 acres of organic greens. It's an operational farm. There are 1,000 fruit trees, 200 different varieties, medicinal herbs, 3 streams, natural swimming pool. It's almost a turnkey operation for doing intensives. There's a 2-story hacienda that will take very little work to turn into an intensive building, and video studio, television studio, where we'll be doing uplinks and starting to create television broadcasts with this work. So there's lots in the works, and we're delighted you're here, Jim, and thank you for being on the team, and the diligence and the time you're putting into together is awesome. So, Jeanie, you've got another caller?
And we do have another caller. Yeah, I think we have a delay. Everybody keeps talking on top of each other.
There is a little bit of more of the usual.
Yeah. So the next caller, I believe, is Brad. It's area code 970. You're on the air.
Hi. This is actually Brad's wife, Cindy, in Pagosa Springs, Colorado. Brad is at a vets meeting, so he's not on. But tomorrow we're having 3 grandchildren over, 2 8-year-old twins and 1 5-year-old. And I've been wanting to introduce them to this work, of course, but I wasn't sure how to do it. I seem to have a fear about doing that because I don't want to mess it up. So while I've got all the experts on here, I'm asking, what does that look like? When they're over here playing, I'm thinking that I'll wait till a conflict comes up, and it will, over toys or something. If someone could walk me through what I would do. And I do have the Work It Out sheet. I have my promise to myself, the snowflake, and my promise to you. I have all those sheets ready to go. So please give me some good advice on how to introduce them to this.
Well,
how about,
Julie,
and this is just a thought, on the old website, and you'd have to put in the exact link, but it's www.whyagain.com/dragon Klingon game.htm. That might be, it might be like, it needs somebody who is a programmer to do something to it so that it works on their new site. It won't work on the new website. And so possibly you could present it as that you're doing some work with us and that we're needing some feedback on this game. And then see if they'd be willing to play the game to give feedback on it.
Okay.
And so, or you could just put it, I just now clicked, the easiest way to get to it is just put whyagain.com/dragon or dragon, DRAGON.PHP.
Okay.
And it will take you to where the links are for that. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe they would play, and they would get it, but they would think that they're doing it to give some feedback on a game.
Okay.
And the last after the dragon is .php. The other thing that I would offer is I would say don't wait till there's a conflict. You can go to the website and there's a copy of I Am Somebody. Or I think you said you had that. So, when they come over, start, create a little, quiet time with them and talk to them about, maybe when they came into the world, gee, I remember the first time I held you and what a sweet presence of love you were, and I've watched you grow and, and recognize who you are, because a lot of times these kids, and sadly, especially if they're church-going kids, aren't getting the message that they're loved. They're not getting the message of who they are. So you might take the I Am Somebody and have them start to, read it to them. If they're not at reading age yet, read it to them. If they are at reading age, have them read it back or use it as a way to teach them to read. And get them where they know it and they memorize it, so that what's in their minds is, rather than the messages that the culture gives, which are sometimes just absolutely disastrous, to give them the message, I am loved. And then the next step would be, Julie has taken the relationship commitment and taken it down to a child's level and how they're going to treat each other. So, explaining to them the meaning of those words and what those things mean and how we're going to do that with each other, and say it to them. Take the children's commitment and speak it to them. Here's how I'm going to treat you. And then the really big test will be when the stress is up and the chips are down, do you treat them like that? Because modeling that will be the most powerful thing you can give them. And when they, prior to the stress, help them build the brain cells so that you're not coming into a stressful situation and inviting them to build new brain cells, because that's not exactly the most receptive place for learning, but teaching it to them before the stress, before the conflict happens. And language. The way things proceed is from external speech. They hear it. Then reading it, speaking it back to you. Maybe make a game of it, however you would play that. Julie might have some ideas on that. And as they start to speak it, then they'll be in the conflict situation, and there's a line there that says, I'm going to treat you lovingly, gently, respectfully. And, you might speak to them about what respect means. What does that mean? And, help them define, so that then they're in a conflict situation, and inside their minds, the speech goes, silent speech. Oh, I'm going to be respectful. Johnny is my cousin. I cherish Johnny. Johnny's part of my family. Gee, I have some anger up right now. I want what Johnny wants, but I'm going to respect Johnny. And as they start to do that and do those behaviors, and they may have to hear it 100 times. They may have to speak it 1,000 times. But as it proceeds into their silent speech, when they reach out with respect, when they watch you reach out with respect, when Johnny isn't doing what you want him to do, they'll go, oh, I can reach out with respect when Johnny isn't doing what I want him to do. So the modeling thing really ties in powerfully, the speaking. And as that moves into their silent speech system, it will then become part of their regulatory system, and respect will be a natural result. Julie, do you have any input?
Yeah, my book does help you a lot with, how I brought that into the classroom. So if you're considering that, one of the things that, how often do you have those children in your space?
Well, that's a whole huge story. Very rarely these days.
Okay. So then,
due to very dysfunctional family dynamics.
Okay. So then, I would start very slowly, and that, what you want to do is you want to create something that's going to work. And so I'd start slowly, and I'd be very, very aware of, how you have labeled them, because if you label them dysfunctional, they will behave dysfunctional in your presence. If you change that label to, we're going to come together for healing and opportunity. What is your purpose for bringing them into your space? Is your purpose for bringing them into your space to, be part of their lives and then be part of your life? Then you want to think about what is the purpose that they're coming there. And then I would, tonight, before tomorrow, write down what you would like to create with these children, because any kind of labeling, I don't care what it is, will have a vibration. And you want a different vibration match than that type of labeling of dysfunction. You want a match that we're creating warmth and support and love and inner strength and healing for these children. We're going to create a foundation where they can do their life differently. And so I would work on that tonight. And one of the things that I found very powerful for children is if I put them. Okay.
We're down to about 30 seconds.
Okay. Put their pictures on the refrigerator around something you want to create.
Okay. Awesome advice.
Cool.
Thank you all so much.
We have to close the show. I have some more ideas, and maybe, Cindy, you could call in tomorrow at the beginning of the show, and we'll continue this conversation, because we definitely have some more input for you. And that's awesome to have that question. So we hold the space. So everybody, we invite you to bring a stranger to the show tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. Give the world the best gift you could possibly give. Have the best year yet of your eternal life. Blessings.